He sat beside me for 32 years, built a life with me, raised a son who used to bring me wildflowers in paper towels after school. And now, with the house smelling like lilies and strangers packing up folding chairs, I was no longer part of the script. Not a single person asked if I needed a ride home, not even Dylan. But that wasn't what stung most. What burned deeper was the way he said it later. In that glass office, like he was reading a grocery list. Your name is no longer listed. Just that, my name, the one that used to be beside his on every legal document we ever signed. Quietly gone, like I had only ever existed in pencil, and someone had just erased me. The house was too clean, too cold. After the funeral, I stayed behind while the others left in polite clumps. The caterers packed up trays. Someone folded the slideshow screen, and the florist came by to pick up the empty stands. Dylan never looked over, not once. I rinsed out 2 mugs left on the counter. One had a lipstick mark I didn't recognize. I placed Aunt M on the drying rack and stood still, trying to remember the last time I had heard Harlan's voice echo through this kitchen. It had been 6 weeks since he passed. Lung failure, quick in the end. I had stayed by his bedside through every round of oxygen, through the night shifts, when the machines beeped too loud, and the nurses stopped trying to make conversation. Dylan had come around, sure, but not like before. He flew in and out, always with a laptop under his arm, taking calls just outside the room. He told me I was being strong, that he admired how calm I was. I think I was just empty. When I got the email from his assistant about the upcoming foundation meeting, I thought maybe they were including me in the next steps. The subject line was short: realignment and administrative updates. The body of the message listed a time and address. That was it. No warm words, no space for grief. I didn't reply, just wrote it down on the notepad we used to keep on the fridge, the one Harlan had labeled in his handwriting. Groceries. To do. Reminders. I hadn't brought myself to throw it away. The morning of the meeting, I sat in the car a full 10 minutes before starting the engine. My hands wouldn't stop fiddling with the steering wheel. Not fear, not yet. Just a knot in my chest I couldn't name. If any of you have ever felt yourself slipping out of the picture without anyone noticing, like your presence has become optional, you'll understand. I wasn't angry then, not yet, but something had started to pull tight inside me, something that would not unravel on its own. The office was too polished, high ceilings, marble floors, and a quiet that hummed like money. I arrived 10 minutes early, hoping to gather myself in the lobby, but the receptionist waved me in before I had time to breathe. The meeting was already underway. The room was long and narrow, with a glass table and tall back chairs. Dylan sat at the head, speaking to a woman in a gray suit I didn't recognize. 3 other people flanked him, all typing on laptops or flipping through folders. No one stood when I entered. A young man pointed to the chair at the far end of the table. There was no nameplate, no folder in front of it. I sat anyway, smoothing the sleeve of my coat and trying to settle the thudding in my chest. Dylan continued speaking, eyes on his tablet. He didn't acknowledge me, just shifted into a presentation about streamlining leadership roles within the foundation, something about long-term sustainability, evolving donor structures, and future-facing governance. He used words like alignment and clarity, words that sounded polite but cut like ice. Then came the document, a revised trust structure. He passed copies around the table, skipping me. The woman next to him flipped to a highlighted section and began reading aloud. It listed the new executive panel. Dylan's name was at the top. My name wasn't there. Not listed as trustee, not as co-director, not even as legacy advisor. I wasn't anywhere. She moved on to a section labeled Succession. It stated that all decisions would be managed solely by the new panel, effective immediately. When she finished reading, no one said a word. Dylan tapped his pen on the glass and nodded toward a staffer who began collecting the folders. I leaned forward. My voice stayed low. I asked if this meant I had been removed. Dylan finally looked up. His face was smooth, unreadable. He said my name was no longer included in the active file. His tone didn't rise. He didn't blink. No longer included. I sat back, slowly. Not one person looked at me. The woman in gray began outlining next steps for donor outreach. Someone mentioned a marketing timeline. It was like I had never spoken. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Dylan stood and thanked the group. He did not speak to me as he left the room. I stayed in my chair a moment longer, eyes fixed on the spot where his folder had rested. Then I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the street below. The glass reflected my face faintly, blurred by sunlight. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't about paperwork or technicalities. This was a choice. I had been removed, silently, officially, on purpose, and he wasn't going to explain it. He didn't think he had to. The drive home felt longer than it was. I parked in the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat still, with my hands resting on my lap. The wind had picked up, rustling the hedges along the porch. The mailbox was leaning slightly, one of the screws coming loose again. I noticed things like that more now, the small signs that something once solid had shifted. Inside, I didn't take off my coat. I walked straight to the back of the house, through the narrow hallway that still smelled faintly of his aftershave, and stood at the doorway of his office. The desk lamp was off, but light from the kitchen spilled enough to make out the shape of everything. His notebooks still sat in a neat stack on the shelf. The calendar on the wall still showed the month before he died. I stepped in quietly, almost like I didn't want to wake anything. The chair let out a tired creak when I sat. It was the same chair he had always used, the one with the scratch on the arm from when he caught his wedding ring on it during a phone call. He never wanted to fix it, said it gave it character. I opened the drawer on the left. It held loose pens, half-used pads, receipts from old bookstore runs, and a few paper clips, rusted from time. Nothing important, nothing telling. The second drawer was deeper. Folders mostly. Tax forms, medical records, donation receipts. I sifted through each one, slow, methodical. I wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe something handwritten, maybe a single line in his voice. But the pages just rustled in quiet protest. Then I remembered something. Near the end, he asked me to check his email more often, said it helped him keep up with correspondence. At the time, I thought it was his way of staying involved, of trying to still matter through the haze of medication and fatigue. I never thought it meant anything more. I opened the old laptop we kept in the cabinet, the one he used when he couldn't sit at his desk anymore. It was slow to start. The fan made a soft hum that reminded me of the oxygen machine from the hospital. Once it booted up, I logged in. The email client opened with a sync delay. Then a flood of unread messages filled the screen. Most were newsletters, medical updates, subscription renewals. But then I saw something else, a folder labeled Forwarded Items. I clicked. Dozens of emails, some from Dylan, some from foundation staff, and at least 10 had attachments with subject lines like revision draft and updated structure. One stood out, dated just 6 weeks before the funeral, sent from Dylan's personal account. It read, "Final draft attached. Confirm removal before next meeting. Use quiet route. No CC to mom." I didn't move. I read it twice. Then a third time, my hand stayed on the desk, fingers pressed flat. There was no greeting, no closing, just those lines. Direct, cold, deliberate. I sat back slowly and stared at the screen. The silence around me tightened. He had known I would never look. He counted on it, counted on my grief, my trust, my silence. He had been preparing this for months, and Harlan never mentioned a word. Not one, even as his breath shortened, even as his voice thinned to a whisper. He never told me Dylan had begun to redraw the lines. But now I had seen the first one, and I wasn't going to look away. The next morning, I woke before the sun, not because of a dream, not from grief, just a strange clarity, steady and cold. I made coffee, but didn't drink it. The mug sat untouched on the counter while I stood at the window, watching the branches outside sway against the early light. I opened the file cabinet in Harlan's office, not the one for taxes or medical records. The locked drawer at the bottom. I still had the key. It had been taped inside my datebook for years. Inside were the original binders we used when drafting the foundation charter, copies of agreements, old emails printed out on aging paper, annotated in Harlan's handwriting. I slid one of the binders free and opened it flat on the desk. My name was everywhere. Co-chair, executive co-signer, beneficiary, legacy planner. Harlan had written in pencil along the margins. Questions, adjustments, words like ensure. Joanna retains final review and double check with counsel. It was there in black and white, not just sentiment, structure. I pulled 3 key documents and made copies at the library downtown. The copier was slow, and the hum of it gave me time to think. I labeled the envelope simply and placed it in a drawer at home, behind a stack of old Christmas cards, somewhere Dylan wouldn't look. Later that week, I called Marvin Bennett. He had been our financial advisor for nearly a decade. Harlan trusted him. So did I. Marvin had retired last spring, but I still had his personal number written in the back of a cookbook. He agreed to meet at a diner on the edge of town, the kind with cracked leather booths and a coffee pot that never emptied. He listened without interrupting as I slid the printed emails across the table. His eyes scanned the lines. His brow tightened. When he spoke, it was measured. He said it looked deliberate, not a misunderstanding. He had seen clients cut out of documents before, but this was clean, too clean. He asked if I wanted to act. I said not yet, not loudly, not until I knew what else Dylan had buried. Marvin said there was one person I should speak to, Lydia Holcomb, probate litigation specialist, quiet reputation, but firm. He gave me her number and told me to take my time. Then he folded the emails and slid them back toward me. I didn't call her right away. I went home, pulled out Harlan's old laptop, and began checking timestamps. I compared Dylan's emails with calendar entries, internal memos from the board, notices I had saved but never fully read. Patterns emerged, edits aligned with weeks I had been out of town. Submissions landed on days I had been sitting in hospital waiting rooms. I created a folder on a flash drive and named it simply Foundation Notes. By the end of the week, I had collected 32 emails, 4 conflicting drafts, and 2 timeline discrepancies on official filings. I placed the drive in an envelope and tucked it behind the loose panel in the hallway cabinet. I was not ready for court. I was not ready for a confrontation, but I was ready for the truth to stop hiding. And I would keep going, quietly, until there was nothing left he could hide behind. The phone number Marvin gave me was written in neat cursive on the back of an old diner receipt. I kept it folded in my wallet for 3 days before dialing. When Lydia answered, her voice was calm, the kind that doesn't fill silence, only waits for it to pass. I told her what I had. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. We arranged to meet the following Monday. Her office was tucked into a brick building off a side street downtown. No plaque outside, no receptionist desk inside, just a single door with her name on frosted glass and the low hum of a heater that ran too strong for spring. She met me in a navy blazer, simple blouse, no jewelry. We shook hands. She didn't ask for small talk. Inside the meeting room, I handed her the manila envelope. She opened it and read each printed email with deliberate focus, not rushing, not reacting. When she finished, she stacked them into 3 groups and asked for the timeline. I recited it as best I could, pulling out the notebook where I had tracked each date, each phone call, each odd gap in communication. Lydia nodded once, then asked if Dylan had provided me copies of the final filings. I said no. She asked if I had any official documentation showing he had the authority to remove co-trustees. I said not directly, only the emails, only the changes that happened in silence. She sat back for a moment, then she asked if I wanted to act. I told her I didn't want a public fight. I wanted the truth on record. I wanted my name back where it belonged. Lydia said we could start by requesting the official filings from the county clerk. Quietly, no formal challenge yet, just a verification of what had been submitted and when. If discrepancies showed up, we would proceed. If the documents proved altered or manipulated, we could open a full review. I nodded. That was enough for now. On the walk back to my car, I passed the old bookstore where Harlan used to stop on Sundays. The window display had changed. New hardcovers lined up like polite soldiers, spines crisp and straight. I didn't go in, just stood there a moment, remembering how he always picked through the bargain bin, saying you never find the truth on the front shelf. That evening, I printed out my own calendar, marked dates, labeled them, added small notes in the margin. Lydia's meeting, Marvin's call, filing request submitted. I placed the printout inside the cover of a ledger Harlan used to keep near the desk. Later that night, I sat on the back steps with a blanket across my legs. I watched the porch light flicker once, then steady. My name hadn't vanished. It had only been misplaced. But now I had people willing to speak it again. And that mattered more than Dylan knew. The invitation came printed on cream cardstock, folded neatly in thirds. It arrived by mail, addressed to me in typed font. No return address. Inside, a note from the foundation board announced the official transition of leadership. Dylan would be speaking. The event would be held at the conference center, across from City Hall. There would be refreshments, a slideshow, a closing statement from the new director. That director being my son. I read the card twice. Then I slid it into the drawer beside the sink. I didn't plan to attend, not at first. But something shifted as the days passed, not out of anger, not out of pride, just a need to witness the moment he believed I would let slip by. I dressed carefully that morning, slacks pressed, a slate blouse, the earrings Harlan gave me on our 25th anniversary. I parked 2 blocks away and walked slowly. When I arrived, the room was already half full. Faces I knew, faces I didn't, old friends of the foundation, donors, board members who had once hugged me and called me by name. They looked past me now, not unkindly, just as if I had become part of the wallpaper. Dylan stood at the podium when I entered. He paused for a second, no more, then continued his remarks. He spoke of growth, of future initiatives, of legacy. He thanked the prior leadership for their contributions. No names, just titles, abstract appreciation. When he mentioned the original founding documents, a staffer rolled out a display board with a framed page behind glass. I recognized it immediately. The charter Harlan and I had written together, except now the line bearing my name had been covered, a white strip of paper glued across it. I didn't move, not yet. He went on about modernization, efficiency, streamlining the board. He referenced legal adjustments that had been filed and finalized. He stated it all plainly, as if no one had ever stood beside him in the beginning. When he finished, the room clapped politely. Then I stepped forward, not far, just enough to be seen. I opened my bag and removed a folder. From it, I pulled a single sheet of paper and handed it to the woman seated nearest the podium. She looked confused, but took it, then passed it along. The next person read, frowned, then passed it to. Dylan watched it travel. He said nothing, his hands lowered to his sides. When the paper reached the board chair, he looked down and stayed quiet for a long beat, then looked at Dylan. I turned and walked toward the back of the room. No announcement, no explanation, just one line printed in plain text across that sheet. Confirm status of Joanna Pierce as original co-trustee and current beneficiary per archive filing. Dated and stamped. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't revenge. It was a name, and it was mine, set back where it always belonged. The day after the meeting, Lydia called. Her voice held no rush, just a quiet certainty that something had shifted. The board had requested a private review, not a hearing, not a formal motion, just time. They wanted to look through the original filings on their own, independently. She told me the file I submitted had already been circulated among a few senior members. No one had spoken against it. No one had moved to defend Dylan either. That afternoon, I walked past the conference center again. The windows were dark now. The chairs inside had been stacked and wheeled into corners. I stood at the curb for a while, watching my own reflection shift as cars passed. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel bitter, only level, like the room had been balanced again, if only slightly. 2 days later, a letter came by mail, a formal request from the interim board asking if I would consider serving as an advisory presence during the foundation's transition period. Not a return to my old role, not an appointment, just a quiet seat at the table. I read the letter without emotion, then folded it once and placed it on the kitchen table. I thought about it overnight. The next morning, I called Lydia. I asked her to send a short response, thanking the board, declining the seat. Instead, I offered something else. I offered to return Harlan's original foundation notes The handwritten ones, the pieces he never filed, but carried around in his briefcase. His scribbles about scholarship priorities, his thoughts on mentorship, his side margins, full of quotes and numbers and dates that mattered only to him. I had kept them all, not as evidence, as memory. 3 days later, I delivered the box to the Foundation's archive room. I placed it on a shelf beside other binders, each labeled by year and department. I left no note, no message, just my handwriting on the side of the box. Foundation notes. Harlan P. On the way out, I passed by the receptionist's desk. She looked up and smiled. She didn't ask my name. She didn't need to. I walked to my car slowly. The spring air had changed. Softer, warmer, the kind that carries no weight. That evening, I sat with Lydia in her office and reviewed the timeline one last time. She asked if I wanted to proceed with any further filings. I said no. I had no interest in court. No need for damages or declarations. I only wanted one thing: to ensure that no one could remove my name again. Not by accident, not by strategy, not by silence. She nodded and marked the file as closed. That night, I returned home and opened the ledger I had placed in the cabinet weeks earlier. I flipped through the pages, past the budgets, the schedules, the old receipts paper clipped to the corners. Near the back, Harlan had scribbled a line I had forgotten. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It is what you protect while you are still here. I closed the book. For the first time in months, the house felt still in a way that didn't ache. It simply held. The kitchen was quiet that afternoon. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, soft but unrelenting. I had folded the laundry and set the kettle on the stove without turning it on. The letter had been sitting in my mind since morning, not as an idea, as a weight. I took out a single sheet of paper, not from the notepad, near the phone or the stack in the drawer. I reached for the stationery Harlan gave me one Christmas, the one with the watermark, too faint to notice unless you held it to the light. He said it was for letters that mattered. I sat at the table and began writing. Not with anger, not even with hurt, just with the kind of stillness that comes when something inside finally settles. I wrote his name, Dylan. Then I let the words follow. I told him I remembered when he used to line up his toy trucks beside the porch railing, how he hated when the wind knocked them over. I remembered the time he scraped his knee at the lake and tried not to cry because he thought it would make his father proud. I didn't write to remind him of those things. I wrote them so I wouldn't forget them. Then I told him something else. I said, when he chose to remove my name, he didn't just erase a title or a signature. He erased a version of me that had stood beside him all his life. The version that showed up to every school recital. The one who kept his report cards folded in a folder with his baby teeth and drawings from second grade. I said I didn't expect an apology. I didn't need him to explain, but I needed to say this. You can cut a name from a line of ink, but you cannot cut history from memory. You can redraw roles, restructure boards, reorganize trusts, but the truth always knows where it started. And so do I. I told him I hoped one day he would see it, not in court papers or foundation meetings, but in his own reflection, because the parts of himself he's proudest of came from places he didn't build alone. When I finished, I read the letter once, then folded it. No envelope, no stamp, just folded and placed into the back of the photo album in the hallway closet. The one with the cracked spine and the picture of him in overalls holding a frog, proud and grinning, hair stuck to his forehead. I closed the album and returned it to the shelf. Not every truth needs to be mailed. Some just need to be written, placed somewhere quiet, and left to rest. That night, I slept without waking. The rain had stopped. The house creaked once, then settled too. The sun had already started lowering when the letter from the foundation arrived. Not in a manila envelope this time, not official or sealed, just a plain white envelope, hand-addressed, postmarked 2 days earlier. Inside, a single page, folded clean. The handwriting was neat, but slightly uneven, written by someone who cared more about the message than the shape of it. It came from a board member I hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Lorraine. She used to run the education outreach side of things. The letter was short. She had attended a recent board session where Dylan's final withdrawal had been formally recorded. His role would not be reinstated. No transition plan was needed. No vote required. He had stepped down, quietly. Then she wrote something else. She said the board had voted to restore the full founding history to the public records. That included the charter, the original notes, and the documentation I had returned. My name would be reprinted on the plaque in the lobby. The white strip had been removed. I folded the letter again and set it on the counter. Later that week, I returned to the foundation, not for a meeting, not for any reason at all, just to see what remained. The new receptionist stood as I entered. Young, polite, unfamiliar. She offered to walk me in, but I declined. I stepped down the main hallway, where framed photographs hung in a timeline. Volunteers planting trees, college students at graduation, donors shaking hands with recipients. In one photo, I stood beside Harlan, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the podium. My face had not changed much, still that same quiet posture, the same cautious smile. For a moment, I remembered the way the lights had felt on my face that day. Warm, honest. At the end of the hall was the new display. The original foundation documents, now set behind clear glass, mounted carefully, with each page labeled. The charter had been restored, and there it was. Line 3, co-founder, Joanna Pierce. No bold font, no fanfare, just clean, respectful type. No longer erased, no longer disputed. I stood there for a long time, not reading, just letting the silence hold. A staff member walked past and gave a small nod. I nodded back. Neither of us spoke. When I left the building, the wind had picked up slightly. The trees in front swayed, but didn't break. That evening, I walked through the neighborhood and past the small bench Harlan used to sit on during his walks. The brass plaque below it still read his name, but someone had cleaned it recently. It shone again. I sat there for a few minutes before heading home. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar from the old dresser Dee had polished earlier. I opened the photo album again, not for the letter, not for Dylan, just to look page after page of a life built piece by piece. None of it perfect, all of it mine, and now no longer hidden, no longer waiting to be claimed, just finally where it belonged. In full view, in my own name. Spring came late that year. The daffodils near the front walk bloomed slower than usual, their stems bending from too much rain. But they bloomed anyway, quiet and steady, without needing to be noticed. I spent more time in the sunroom, not doing anything urgent, just letting light land where it wanted. The stack of books on the table remained untouched, except for the one Harlan never finished. I left the bookmark where he had last placed it, not as a gesture, just because it felt right. The foundation sent a program for the upcoming donors' luncheon. My name was printed on the inside page, listed under legacy contributors. Nothing more, nothing less. I tucked the paper into the drawer beside the tea tins. I didn't plan to attend. I had no interest in being thanked in public. A week later, I changed my mind. Not for them, for myself. I chose a gray suit, simple earrings, and the small silver pin Harlan used to wear on his coat, the one shaped like an oak leaf. I remembered him saying once that the strongest trees made no sound when they grew. They just kept growing. At the luncheon, I sat near the back. The room was filled with new names. Young professionals, eager voices, fresh energy. But the walls hadn't changed. Neither had the scent of the wooden floors or the way the sunlight angled through the tall windows. Midway through the program, one of the new board members stepped to the podium. Her voice was steady. She spoke of legacy, of those who built the foundation's bones, long before its name had any weight. She paused before reading my name. No build-up, no spotlight, just said it plainly, then continued on. No applause followed, no turning heads, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Later, someone stopped me in the hallway and asked about Harlan. I told them he loved blackberry jam and always hummed while writing grant proposals. They laughed, not knowing if I was serious. I didn't explain. I just smiled. That night, I returned home and opened the cabinet in the study. Inside, the file labeled Founding Notes still sat, tucked neatly beside Harlan's datebooks and old letters. I added one more page, a handwritten timeline, simple and spare, with no names beyond the first two. Harlan, Joanna, beginning to end. I sealed the folder and placed it back without ceremony. Some stories never need to be retold. They only need to be remembered. And mine, at last, no longer asked to be proven. It simply stood, complete, whole, quiet, and enough. If you've ever felt like your place in the story was erased, or your name left out of something you helped build, I hope this story reminded you that truth has its own way of surviving. You don't always need to fight loud to be seen. Sometimes just standing your ground with quiet clarity is enough. And if this story touched something in you, even just a little, I hope you give yourself permission to remember who you've always been. Thank you for being here. In this quiet space, you are not alone.